Hey guys, it's Monday, so that means we're going to do another educational segment. We've got Elsie, our mascot for education. Remember, Elsie stands for Lunar Space Elevator Infrastructure. So today we're going to talk about not the part that we talked about last week, which was really the engineering of the system. We're going to broaden things out and look at the system from a holistic perspective. But before we do, I want to encourage you that on Wednesday, we're going to be hosting a Google Plus Hangout. I'd encourage you guys to show up. We're going to be talking about really the way that space is starting to trend. We're especially talking to the younger folks in the community. That's the Space Gen Advisory Council, NASA's Academy, which is really kind of one of the areas that they train younger NASA employees. We're going to talk about International Space University, my alma mater. We're going to talk about SEDS, which is Students for Exploration and Development of Space, Yuri's Night, the Moon Society, and of course, the reason we're doing this is to support the National Space Society's Kickstarter campaign. So please make sure you check that out. Alright, so coming back to our educational bit today, we want to focus on the big aspects of building this elevator. Now, normally everybody considers here's the Earth, here's the Moon, you've got a big long string, and you've got a space station at the Lagrange point, and all of that's important. And if you haven't seen that, I encourage you to look at the last video that we had Monday. But what I want to talk to you about today is looking at the system from a holistic perspective. You may have heard me mention before the 1,000 questions or the 10,000 questions or the 10 million questions. That's an indication that I often say we don't have all the questions yet, let alone have all the answers. Well, the reality is if we're going to build this system, we need to organize the questions so that we can systematically go through the steps to answer them. So how do we do that? We focus on kind of 4 basic buckets. All of these questions, all of these issues, all this research goes into 4 basic buckets. You've got hardware, finance, outreach, and framework. And we're going to get into more specifics of each of these. Hardware is the one that most people are most interested in and most enthusiastic about. That's when we talk about rockets and solar electric propulsion. That's when we talk about sinking a spike into the lunar surface. We're talking about hardware. And I don't want to minimize the role of software in this thing because frankly, all of this hardware depends on software. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to build is a physical, tangible product. So that's why I refer to it as hardware. But we love you software guys because we couldn't do this without you. So we've got hardware, business, outreach, and framework. Those are the big buckets. Within hardware, we refer to science and discovery, technology, engineering, and mass production and scaling. Now these are each sub-problems under the larger problem. Science and discovery is the aha moment. It's the eureka moment. It's that concept where an idea formulates into something important. The history of the lunar elevator is that Jerome Pearson came up with the concept about 2 years before I was born. It was completely unbuildable at that point. It was really more of a thought experiment. Not because of materials, but because of space infrastructure and space access and launch capabilities. Fast forward to about 2005 or 2006, Dr. Dana Andrews came to me and he started talking about the lunar elevator. And much of what we described in last week's video is, some of the brainchild of Andrews. And then it was later moved forward by Charles Radley, who really had that breakthrough moment of You know, getting down to the lunar surface is difficult. Soft landing on the moon is difficult. So the elevator really solves that problem. So that's really what I'm talking about, science and discovery. And where we're at today, most of our problems are in that science and discovery stage. As we move forward, when we start building an experiment like our Kickstarter campaign's experiment, now we're starting to move into the technology and engineering stage, when we start creating experiments to prove a particular point. That kind of engineering is very difficult and very challenging, and that's going to take probably the bulk of our funds and the bulk of the time over this problem over the next probably 6, 7, 8 years or so. And finally, that last couple of years is when we start moving into mass production and scaling. We have to create a string that's 250,000 kilometers long. Now, fortunately, Toyobo, the makers of Xylon, one of our reference materials, they make a whole lot of string. Even if we use, when we order our 250,000 kilometers of string, we're still only using 1/4 or 1/10 of Toyobo's annual production. So they've got the mass production and scaling part really well defined. But that string is not perfect. We need to do things to that string, which means we're going to have to mass produce our own system to modify that string. So scaling is always a real problem. Then we're going to talk about business. Income and expenses, finance and accounting, and operations and management. Again, 3 problems under the primary problem. Finance and accounting, how do you pay for this thing? Who's going to pay for it? What's the return on investment, or ROI, for whomever finances the project? Those are really difficult questions that we really don't have good answers to yet. We're working on it, we're developing those answers, but those are answers that are going to take a long time to develop. Operations and management, we're a distributed team. There's 2 people in this office, there's 2 people in Kansas, there's 4 or 5 guys in San Diego. We have folks in Paris and Korea and all over the place. But as an operations problem, it's a really complicated system, just making sure our people communicate with each other. So each of those are problems under the primary problem of finance. Outreach is, that's the reason why we're doing, these videos here. We have to get out there and tell our story. So you've got the primary problem of outreach, but you've also got media and social, you've got education and culture, and you've got political and government. Now, each of these impact our ability to build the elevator. I don't want to minimize that. That's really important. The Kickstarter campaign could not have succeeded had we not actively worked with the media and actively had an outreach campaign that ultimately impacted you guys. Politics and government's a little hairier, it's a little fuzzier, because it's harder for us to see if that process is working. But we do know that in general terms, the American space community has really been pushing towards commercialization, and you can see the results of that. Congress passes laws, NASA enacts rules and regulations, and ultimately the commercial sector is beginning to grow within the space community. So all of that falls under the heading of outreach. And then finally, the 4th one is framework, and that's when you're talking about law and insurance, you're talking about regulatory and policy, and you're talking about the global geopolitical and military environment. Now, I don't mean environment in the sense of tree hugging. I happen to be a big tree hugger, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the environment of the world and how the world interacts. Now, if you're building a local lemonade stand, maybe that last one's less important. But if you're building an elevator on the moon, you have to consider how the geopolitical environment and the military perspective is going to influence and impact building the elevator. If you don't consider those perspectives, then the blinders that you have are going to come back and cause problems. So we look at law and policy, international regulations, U.S. regulations, and a lot of people don't completely understand this, but we also have to look at insurance. I'm a firm believer that if you can't insure it, then you can't build it. And to dive into that a little bit deeper, insurance is really about spreading risk amongst a lot of knowledgeable people. So insurance can be how the Kickstarter campaign worked. A whole bunch of people gave a little bit to contribute towards this larger concept. In a way, that's insurance that you directly participate in. But insurance, the way you normally think about it from car insurance or house insurance or something like that, it's about spreading risk. It's about defining risk and dividing it out amongst people that are willing to take a chance and hopefully profit on the risk. So all of those facts, all of those elements, those buckets, hardware, finance, outreach, and framework, all of them have 3 subpoints underneath them. And in order for this project to work, we actively have to work on all of those fronts, all 12 of those fronts at the same time. So it might be that I'm spinning my wheels in one area, so I'll shift gears and we'll work on something else, and we'll shift gears and we'll course correct. And so we're always working on one of these 12 problems, and often we're working on several at once. So I hope that that's clear. That's, by the way, what I refer to as the Noumenia process challenges. We're going to talk a lot more about the Noumenia process over time, but that's the Noumenia process challenges, and I'll be happy to answer any questions on that. Thanks for your support. Looking forward to talking to you guys again soon. Take care. Bye-bye. All right. How was that?
Pretty good. Ship's gonna die.
What's that?